welcome back to Beating a Dead Horse. As always, I am your host, Sean McKinda.
And I'm your host, a racist piranha plant.
Oh, we're getting just right off the bat, we're diving into that, huh? I was going to bury the lead a little bit, try and encourage people to listen before they click away, but I guess we're just going with it, huh?
Sean, I'm here to spark the podcast. I'm here to infuriate the listeners. I'm here to give them those rage listens. I'm here to tell you that your fave is problematic, even though this was not my topic, even though I'm co-opting this 100%. So,
yeah, please don't click off the podcast yet. If you have heard who Jackson has chosen to identify himself as, it's obviously something we're going to be talking about this week. I have a lot of thoughts. I have done research on it. I have come to this podcast fucking prepared, which is not something we often do. So stick around. We're going to talk about that. For now, though, we should introduce what we're doing and why we're doing it. Because we have entered September, and so we are talking about movies that are ostensibly, and in that case, that word is doing a lot of heavy lifting, feel-good movies that people watch when they just want to have a good time. They're just gonna, sing to some tunes, have a grand old night, and just forget all their worries, their troubles, their woes, and go on down to Skid Row. I don't know if that was the lyrics, but it rhymes, so I leaned into it. We're sticking with it.
amazing.
We're talking about Little Shop of Horrors, specifically the 1986 movie version. We will be diving a little bit into the play, as well as the original 1960 B movie that was not a musical at all. Just as point of references as we go through this, but for the most part, the immediate focus will be on the 1986 musical.
Yes. I would love to do the business of comparing it to the stage show, to the production that the movie is based on. Unfortunately, I've only ever seen like a community theater version of this, which very obviously took some influence from the movie because the movie is more famous. And so I know that there are some substantial script differences between the stage show and the movie, and I think that those are relevant. But as far as the original Broadway production, can't really speak to that now, can I?
And I mean, even at that point, the original Broadway production is no longer relevant because it has been dwarfed by the stage show, influenced by the movie. So what you're going to see if you go out today is what we're going to talk about.
Although, that's actually interesting because I might argue that a version of the stage show is the one you're most likely to encounter, because I bet you that some people are thinking oh, this is kind of weird, why are they talking about this movie? It's you don't ever really hear anyone talk about this movie, but you do see a lot of community theater and high school productions putting on this show. So if you're just kind of some schlub going through life, you might be more likely to see it at your grandkids' local stage as opposed to going down to Hulu, HBO Max to get your sweet racist plan.
That is true. That is fair. But the point I was more so making was just, even stage shows that we see today will have been influenced by the movie in a way that is important to keep in touch with, given what we're about to talk about.
No, that's a valid point. It was just something that that's kind of weird to think about it. There are a lot of stories that you are way more likely to encounter as amateur productions than anything else today.
That is true. Although this does have a fairly large cult following, I have to imagine, just given that it still crops up here and there.
Oh yeah, I mean it's still a pretty famous movie. I mean it's culturally, I feel if you say Little Shop of Horrors, most people know what you're talking about. They probably even know Audrey 2's voice, which we're gonna get into that.
Yeah, we are.
But yeah, so it's definitely got a cultural footprint, but it's more if you're in, actually it's funny because I watched this with my sister and her fiance, and my sister's fiance was even oh, if you had seen this when you were a teenager, you would have loved this because you were a weird theater kid, and it's got gore and murder and stuff. She's like, you're not wrong. And also I have to put in their contribution because I promised that I would. They both agreed there needed to be more murder. He only fed 2 people to the plant.
Well, before we really get into this, we should explain what Little Shop of Horrors is, if by some chance someone does not know.
Sure.
So if you're somehow entirely unfamiliar with what Little Shop of Horrors is, it is a musical based on a 1960s movie wherein a plant gets the taste for human flesh. Depending on what version you're watching, if it's the 1960s version, it is homegrown. If you are watching the stage show or the movie, it is an alien plant that comes from outer space. And from there, it basically turns into Faust, in which our main character makes a deal with the devil and starts feeding it people to satiate its hunger, and he gets rewards, quote unquote, out of it in the way that, you know, you don't deal with the devil because the devil wins no matter what type of thing. That's the high level explanation of Little Shop of Horrors. That is something that if you have heard the name Little Shop of Horrors, you probably know. I wouldn't say that anything I said there was spoilery, even though a lot of that stuff doesn't happen till at least the midpoint of the movie.
It's also the kind of story, to be fair, where like it's got enough of a cultural footprint that as soon as like they're like, oh, look at this weird plant I've been growing, like, come on now, it's called Little Shop of Horrors. You know that plant's gonna start doing some fucked up shit.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure like the opening monologue even explains that. So yeah,
it's not a movie that you are watching for its plot.
No, absolutely not. So Jackson, what did your sister and her fiance have to say?
Oh, just that there needed to be more murder, basically.
Right.
And that it was weird.
So what did you have to say?
What did I have to say? I mean, look, I say this as a preface to all the other more important stuff we're going to say, but man, that is a nice looking puppet.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm tempted to give the movie a recommendation off that puppet alone. Yeah, I mean, there are some scenes. It was kind of a wild experience, honestly. Like, the movie oscillated back and forth between uncomfortable for several reasons. Sean was much more clued into the racism. I was much more clued into the uncomfortable, like, domestic abuse played for laugh stuff, because that's a lot more explicit. So, like, I mean, you know, I'd be cringing in one scene, and then the plant would show up, and it'd have, like, little buds on its vines going, like, ah, and its little mouth would open, and I'd shriek with joy and delight. So, yeah, I think, like, artistically, on what the movie set out to do, I would call it a failure. But fuck, dude. I mean, I can't stress this enough. That's one of the coolest puppets I've ever seen.
God, yeah, no, the puppet is absolutely incredible. There's absolutely no denying that. Kind of like when we were talking about 2001, there were times where, like, I genuinely was not sure if it was real or not, which speaks to how good that puppet is, that, like, it just was there, and, like, holy shit, that looks 100% real. There are some scenes that stand out as absolutely wonderful. The domestic abuse stuff gets turned on its head in one scene that is just absolutely one of the greatest scenes ever put to film. I would watch an entire movie based around Steve Martin and surprise guest who I'm just not going to reveal because it is kind of a surprise. I didn't know he was in this movie. He showed up and I squealed like a child because seeing this man always makes me excited. So that scene, absolutely one of the greatest of all times. And I say that without a trace of irony in my voice. I adored it. It was wonderful. It was subversive. It was great. On the whole, it's probably worth mentioning that I am not a musical person. There's a couple that I really, really like. I absolutely adore And in the Apocalypse, which I have mentioned on the podcast before. If you're looking for something to watch this Christmas, it is a Christmas zombie movie meets High School Musical. Genuinely one of my all-time favorite movies. I really like Monty Python's Spam a lot. I have mixed feelings about a lot of other musicals. I watched a bunch with Sam recently for her podcast, and came away mostly with a headache. So I think that's a personal problem. That's not a slight against any of the musicals. I enjoyed them. I'm just like, they're not usually for me. So like, take that into consideration with what I'm saying, in that I thought it was fine. If you include the fact that I really like Spamalot and I really like Anne and the Apocalypse, it should have theoretically elevated this movie because it kind of has similar vibes and that it's gory and weird and funny, but it never really elevated past that either.
I'll say this just while this is relevant. And we're gonna go ahead and like chop off another finger on the altar of our Lord and Savior Lindsay Ellis, but she talks about musicals a lot, and I basically agree with everything she said in her Cats video, and that I was a theater kid growing up, so I've got some fondness for musicals, but not so much movie musicals. Like, there's always something kind of stilted about them to me, which is why like I found myself so delighted by this puppet, in that it felt like the thing with the most like life and theatricality in it. So I actually probably enjoyed, stage show community theater experience with this more, because they make a big puppet of their own, and you're just in the room, and they play to the crowd. The live musical is a very different thing from a movie musical, a preferable thing in my humble opinion.
And admittedly, I've only seen Spamalot on the stage, and every other musical I have seen has been via a movie. And they are usually worse because of that. My one exception is Anne and the Apocalypse, which was specifically designed to be a movie and not an adaptation of a stage show. And I think the stage show adaptations seem to be worse. Again, I'm not a musical guy. I couldn't really tell you for sure. But let's chop that finger off to Lindsay Ellis. I trust her pretty much explicitly in that regard.
Well, and also again, like while we're talking about chopping off that finger, I think I'm going to steal another one of her talking points, that I think it's no accident that the most successful musicals are like animated movies for precisely that reason. It's the difference between Lion King 1994 and Lion King 2019, 2018, whatever the fuck that came out.
It's already been forgotten about by history. Don't worry about it.
I know. And so, yeah, the musicals are broad, they're camp, they're bombastic, and the best movie musicals lean into that a little bit. Again, that's why I'm so hypnotized by this plant. Like every time the puppet was there, I was like, yeah, this is camp, this is great. But then other times it felt like some of the camp and some of the slapstick, like for these reasons, was kind of awkward. Like a lot of this like really broad stuff that like works on the stage just didn't work at all. Like, oh my God, I wanted to like, wear earmuffs every time Audrey 1 talks. Like, shit. And that's a bit that like works much better as like a broad caricature and not so much as a character who you're supposed to root for. We'll talk about that in spoilers. But
this is all to say nothing of the big issues with the movie, and this is why I have yet to even come down whether I would recommend this movie, because not only do we have Jackson's mention of domestic abuse, which is uncomfortable, although fairly undercut. I feel like if it was just that, I could be like, some warnings about it, but like, it's fine enough. Go enjoy it. There's some interesting stuff to it. Just be aware, put that trigger warning in front of it. Just, be cognizant of the media that you are consuming. But we have to talk a little bit about race and this movie because, and this is to paraphrase, I did a lot of reading about what I'm saying here. I've read academic articles, I've read reviews of people talking about this. I actually went out and did research because I genuinely felt like I was losing it a little bit. I'm like, am I seeing things that people aren't seeing? What the fuck is going on here? And one of the reviews I saw was basically like, Little Shop of Horrors is subtly racist. And the problem with that, more so than the fact that it is racist, is that it's an incredibly subtly so. And so it feels all the more insidious when you kind of start to piece it together and like you go, oh, hang on a second. Is the plant black coated? Because that's icky. And then you kind of, you put that there. And then you start to think about all the far-ranging implications that could have, because it kind of recontextualizes a lot of the movie in a very bad, icky, gross way. And with that in mind, I think this is one of those movies that I would recommend if you're interested in the cultural experience of, but for the most part, I would say skip it. Like, go into this movie armed with the knowledge of what you're about to watch, and not as someone going like, I want to watch a wacky plant do things. Because, I mean, it's kind of a minstrel show at that point.
I basically agree. I think that, like, you know, knowledge is power, and that, like, if there is, for, like, the cultural context reason, honestly, frankly, if you're going to watch Little Shop of Horrors, like, I'm sure your community theater is doing a production of that. It'll be more fun. Just go do that. Otherwise, again, it's a real nice puppet. If you want to watch it, if you want to watch a YouTube compilation of the scenes with the puppet, I wouldn't blame you.
Also, the Steve Martin X surprise guest scene is absolutely wonderful, and you can probably find that outside of any context on YouTube, and I highly recommend that because there aren't racial undertones in that one, and in fact it is all about taking away the power of an abuser, and it is very good for that regard. But the rest of the movie still exists, and we have to talk about that.
The rest of the movie is pretty yikes in a lot of ways.
So do we want to start talking about that, because we're gonna delve deep into this in both the abuse ways as well as the racial ways.
Sure.
So let's call it spoilers here. If you are enjoying the podcast, please leave us a review on iTunes, tell your friends, support us on Patreon, patreon.com/BADHcast. Follow us on Twitter at BADH_cast. Next week, we're going to be taking this in a very different direction, and we're going to be talking about Kiki's Delivery Service, one of those famous beating a dead horse whiplashes that we just like to leave our viewers with. And we're just going to hopefully continue a month of just positive and uplifting, ostensibly, movies. But thankfully, we're not going to be staring into the void with this one. We're just going to be talking about where it failed, intentionally or otherwise. Hopefully, Kiki will just have it praised to heap on, because I don't think either of us have seen that movie.
Nope. I'm working my way through the Miyazaki backlog, and I've chipped quite away at it, but Kiki's Delivery Service is still one that's eluded me, and it's a favorite of a friend of mine, and so I'm delighted to watch it.
So Kiki's Delivery Service next week, hopefully far less racism talk, because this feels like it's going to be a bit of a bummer episode, but an important episode nonetheless. So let's call spoilers here. And Jackson, the question is, racism or domestic abuse? Where do we start?
Let's start with the domestic abuse, because I feel like it'll be quicker. It's easier to sort of talk about because it's more explicit, and then we could segue into the deep roots of the problem.
So please talk to us about the domestic abuse, because this is we kind of came at this with two very different problems, and this one's yours.
Yeah, so with the domestic abuse stuff, I mean, like I said, it's not. This won't take that long, because mostly the movie plays Steve Martin's character, you know, as a sadistic dentist, and his musical number. I think it's a fun little musical number. It's a fun little idea, you know. This, like,
I have known you'll be a dentist my entire life, despite only seeing this movie for the first time yesterday.
And, like, in general, it's a good bit. Like, you know, you have shitty greaser boyfriend. Turns out he's, like, actually a dentist because he's a sadist. I mean, it's clever. It's clever stuff. The problem where it comes in for me, and, like, even giving the movie the benefit of the doubt, and in terms of, like, satire, like treading the realm of satire, is that, like, it feels often like the movie plays the domestic abuse stuff, like, far more straight than it plays the dentist, like, greaser sadism stuff. And like she starts the movie talking about like trying to cover up her black eye. Like when Steve Martin yells at her, there's a lot of genuine venom in her voice, in his voice. Like maybe that's just me, but it felt like much worse than when he's cackling like a supervillain. He also has a Dennis Hopper baby wanna fuck gas
I
mask.
cannot believe that we are never going to escape Blue Velvet. I did not think that would be a touchstone as much as it is.
I just remembered that's not relevant at all to the discussion of like the portrayal of domestic abuse, but I just wanted to mention it because it made me laugh. But I think that like I'm willing to give the movie some rope, or at least the concept some rope, and that like, you know, it is supposed to be satire. We are to some extent like, you know, criticizing the, you know, misogynist society of like, you know, the 60s and like greaser culture or whatever. Yes. So like, okay. But even with that, like the way that the movie in particular portrays that stuff, and also the doubly icky like cocktail that was not present in the stage show, because spoiler alert, in the stage show the plant eats everybody, all the main characters, including Audrey 1, including Rick Moranis,
Which is important on my part too. We'll come back to that.
Yeah. Although in that case, it might be even worse for Sean. So we'll talk.
It
about
is.
that.
We will. There's a lot to talk about. Continue.
So, you know, so what's gonna be? Huh? You gonna have sexism? Sexism. Or you gonna have racism? Racism. Turns out Little Shop of Horrors said both.
Jackson, no one is going to understand that reference. I barely understand that reference.
I don't care. I made it anyway. So, to get us back to something coherent. So this goes doubly if we're talking about misogyny. One element is that, you know, tale as old as time. You have Rick Moranis playing every fucking character that Rick Moranis plays. He has one bit and he does it very well. You know, like, oh gosh, like, mister, I got my big glasses and I'm small and I'm nerdy and this is my comedy role. So you're having Rick Moranis do that, and he makes his Faustian bargain with the plant to feed people, to get fame and fortune, to, you know, win over the nice lady. Aw, dogged nice guy. Aw, shucks. So Rick Moranis in the movie version feeds people to this plant and is rewarded for it with the girlfriend who sees him for who he truly is, and, you know, isn't like hanging around with mean old Chad anymore. And it's like peak fedora tipping nice guy cringe, which with that like healthy spoonful of, you know, like playing domestic abuse for laughs does not paint a pretty picture in the movie's favor. So like I said, this was not an element that the stage show plays with. For one, because they're such broad like caricatures, we're not expected to be invested in whether Rick Moranis is gonna get the girl, right? Like, we don't give a fuck if Rick Moranis gets the girl. I want to see the plant eat people, you know. my sister and fiance said it best: murder more.
I mean, I'm all about this. I was expecting far more of a horror movie, and I was very much let down by the lack of death and destruction in this movie.
So in the stage show, then, when like, you know, his own like bumbling incompetence and his pathetic simping gets him and his girlfriend and his boss and everyone else in the world eaten by like a monster piranha plant, that feels like a much more like appropriately like darkly satirical ending. Like, because right now it just feels like, you know, a classic cringy fucking trope. Like, oh, Chad beats her. Here comes me, Reddit nice guy. We're going to save the day with my murdering plant. Oops, I, you know, fucked everything up. But instead of being punished for it, I'm going to look like a big manly badass by blowing it up. And it's real cringe. I know that this is not the ending that they wanted. They wanted the ending of the stage show, but test audiences were not okay with it, which, I mean...
Wild. Absolutely wild.
Like, test audiences are such a fucking blight, dude. Oh my god.
I am not here to disagree with you.
Yeah. but that's basically it. I mean, you know, you can have the debate over whether or not you can present dark subject matter in like a comedic or satirical way, right? Like that's a debate you can have, but I don't think that this movie handles that topic with much grace. And then it does the dog and nice guy thing. So there's just all sorts of misogyny all over the movie, and I don't care for that.
I do have to give it credit because this is the scene that I was talking about with Steve Martin, and surprise, it's Bill Murray, in which Bill Murray essentially gets off. He is the masochist version of sadomasochist. He is the yin to Steve Martin's yang. So when this scene happens, Steve Martin is largely frustrated because this man is taking away all his fun, and the pleasure is being robbed from him, and it feels very sweet in a revenge sort of way. Like, you're like, oh yeah, fuck this guy, like he's understanding what he's doing to other people type of deal. And it's actually, like, the way it's framed, everything about it feels far more conventional filmmaking, which is great in that regard. I think this movie does well when it is shot like a film as opposed to a musical, and leans into the horror tropes that it so clearly wants to take part in. And so, like, this scene plays really well. It feels really good to watch Steve Martin just be like cut down a peg and like frustrated because he can't get what he wants despite getting what he wants nonstop. Like, it's a very, very good scene. But it doesn't help with the misogyny. It just helps with making Steve Martin look like a fool.
Yeah, it helps with being a good bit, and that's not even a Band-Aid. It's something in another room, basically.
Yeah, so I mean, I do just want to talk about that because the context of everything else going on in the movie does set that up, and it pays it off very nicely, but it doesn't repair the damages it does elsewhere is the problem. Just wanted to mention that because I love that scene and genuinely think it's one of like the best scenes I've seen in film in a long time. So you want to switch gears?
I think we've covered it. Like I said, the sexism, misogyny stuff is a lot more cut and dry. So let's get into it.
So I'm gonna start with citing my sources this time because I think that these are important sources to cite. I'm going to be borrowing heavily from all three of them, just at various times. Vulture's theater review, Little Shop of Horrors is a Bouquet with a Bite by Helen Shaw. Wilted Plant on Tucson Weekly by James Reel, as well as the academic piece Feed Me, Power Struggles and the Portrayal of Race in Little Shop of Horrors by Marc Jensen. Those are the big three I'm going to be referring to. They are pretty much what has helped inform the fact that I don't feel like a crazy person seeing something that wasn't there, because it is definitely there, and this has really helped reinforce that. So I think to start off with, what we should talk about is what is coding, because this is the basis of pretty much everything else that I'm about to say. So coding basically is little symbols that helps you identify what this person is. That is a very simplistic way of explaining it, and one that doesn't really do it justice, but it gets the point across. So, like, to code a person like me, you might be like, oh, microphones, podcasts, skateboard, shit like that. You're like, okay, that's a white nerdy dude, you know what he's about. Whereas black coding tends to be a little bit more insidious and relying on racist, unfortunate tropes, such as hip hop, R&B, large lips, a lack of intelligence, specific word choices. And Audrey 2 plays into several of those very hard. I'm actually going to ignore the large lips trope just because it is something that could easily be swatted away. I think that it is a reading that is important, but because it is so easily dispensed of by going, oh, it's an alien plant, what do you expect it to be? I think that it will, well, on the whole, weaken the argument, but it is worth making a mental note of.
Right. I mean, and to give credence to what you're saying, like, immediately you could also say, like, oh, like, I mean, that's what a piranha plant looks like. Like, a piranha plant has kind of large lips. Like, is it being really racially coded? I don't think the piranha plant is.
Right. So, like, it could go either way is what I'm saying. Like, you can't build your argument based entirely on that. But thankfully, we don't have to, because this is a musical and musical cues are real helpful. So most of the music in this musical is performed by white people, specifically Rick Moranis and Audrey One. I don't know the actress's name. I apologize.
Helen Green, I think?
That sounds right. Something along those lines. I apologize if we got it wrong. I will look it up and edit it in post if we did. We didn't get it wrong. It is Ellen Green. Or Steve Martin. So the whole thing is that these characters are set in the 1950s, 1960s, where the white characters are all singing some form of like white rock and roll. Like, you know, the classic, like kind of early, what is now psychobilly type of stuff. Very Elvis era, very white musical rock and roll type of stuff. Audrey 2, on the other hand, when it starts sings R&B, which at the time and still is largely dominated by black performers. It is a styling of black musicians, and that's not a dig by any stretch of the imagination. It's just what is commonly associated in that way, and also just not really a white space performance. So right off the bat, we have this idea that Audrey 2 only sings in R&B. And even when Audrey 2 is trying to sway Seymour into a, feed me Seymour relationship, Audrey 2 is singing in R&B cadences, and Seymour is continuing to sing in that white rock and roll. And so, like, you clearly have this clashing ideals of this black music versus very white-coded music, which is a far stronger reference to black coding of this character. The final nail in the coffin is definitely the way that Audrey talks. Not only is Audrey 2 portrayed by a black man, we'll get back to that in a second, but Audrey 2 is pretty much the only character aside from the 3 black women who do like the backup vocals throughout the music, who swears, which is very much a thing of the 50s, 60s, where like, oh, the white people have that whole puritanical element to them, and the black folk are looked far more as less intelligent, using things like bad words and less intelligent sounding things. And as a result, Audrey 2 in general sounds far more just operating on instinct rather than like a sense of intelligence, which is not again, I'm trying to be very careful with how I'm wording things here. This is largely off the cuff, despite the research I have done on it. Not a dig against black culture. Black culture is intelligent. There is no intelligence differentiation there, except in the coding of this movie, which is made explicit.
It's black culture is made out to be less intelligent by racist coding.
Yes, thank you. That is the best way I can put it. So with these 3 things combined, you can kind of very easily tell that Audrey 2 is black coded. What do we do with that information? Now that we know that Audrey 2 is a black coded character, where do we look from here? So let's start off with just talking about the history of black folks in horror movies. There's a wonderful documentary on Shudder. I cannot think of the name of it while we're recording. I will also edit that in post. It's called Horror Noir, A History of Black Horror. Talking about like the history of black folks and basically how they had long been seen as the enemy on screen, and how a lot of old horror monsters and horror tropes could easily be seen as stand-ins for black individuals. Add on to that the fact that Audrey 2 came from space and is an actively hostile invader, something that a lot of racists look at black folks as being, hence like the whole white genocide idea, the white replacement idea, basically this concept that black folks are coming into our cities, our homes, our living spaces and slowly replacing us, which is ultimately Audrey 2's goal. Audrey 2 wants to take over the world. A further underscoring of what I've been saying. And so you're already starting to pick up like, oh God, oh no, what are we doing here? Then we get to the endings, which you can go one of two ways with the ending. If you want to take it from the original intended ending where Audrey 2 kills everyone and takes over the world, that kind of ties in with that whole white replacement thing there, doesn't it? But hey, that's not the ending we got. We got the ending where fucking Rick Moranis and Audrey 1 go and live in the suburbs, and it's great and it's happy, and they got away from the menace that's coded as a black character. Oh God, is this a white flight thing? Like people trying to leave their homes to get away from the invasive black folk? Because that's also not great, and it's really not great because we pan down at the end and hey, look, the black metaphor is in the garden of suburbia in the form of another little Audrey, an Audrey 3, if you will, which that's not great either, kind of implying an infestation. Also a very common trope amongst black actors in horror movies. So basically what I'm saying here is that this movie is very easy to be read as a racist metaphor, and is fact coded very readily as a racist metaphor, and therefore is a fairly racist metaphor. Allow me to even back that up a little bit with a quote from Mr. Director himself as to why he casted a black man for Audrey, which is to say,
I'm sitting on the edge of my seat here. Sean's been holding out on me. He's been waiting for this moment for me to hear it, so I'm ready.
It's gonna be rough, guys. He was exactly what I was looking for. Somebody who had an edge to him, who was real black, real street, who had a touch of malevolence but could be silly and funny at the same time. I'm not done. The article goes on to say, as though attempting to moderate this statement into something more politically correct, Oz's interviewer continues by explaining that the streetwise plant envisioned by the street writers essentially demanded a black voice. What is a white streetwise voice? Oz asks. I can't imagine it. Actually, if there is such a thing, it's a ripoff of a black voice. And with that, the prosecution rests.
Also, Frank Oz, I know that the greatest work of media of all time, Metal Gear Solid, hasn't been made yet. But there is a white streetwise voice, and it's called Solid Snake.
I just spent like 10 minutes going through like a very carefully structured out like argument that I think did a decent job of conveying my point in a way that is coherent and interesting, and you fucking end it with a Metal Gear reference. I am done. I am donezo. This podcast over, boy.
Wait. Let me try to duct tape this beast back together.
It's done. It's over. We're done. End of podcast. Play me out, boys.
But I only didn't say anything because I basically agree. I felt I had nothing to add. I think Sean did such a wonderful job that truly the only way to make my presence known was to make a Metal Gear meme when he least expected it. However,
However,
I'm going to do something very uncharacteristic of me, and I'm going to play devil's advocate for a position I don't think I actually believe. Actually, I'm like 98% certain that I don't actually believe it, because it's something that I was formulating just now.
Okay, I'm curious to hear what you have to say.
It was actually something that you had mentioned, that the coding with the music, and that the rock and roll is coded as white music.
However, I see where this is going. Rock and roll is developed by black individuals and co-opted by white people.
Like so much else of American pop culture.
But so if we have I'm gonna just jump off this real quick right now. If we are already operating on the assumption that everything else about this movie is very clearly black coded, the fact that the director wouldn't know that feels fairly on the nose.
It feels fairly on the nose, but this is me again. I don't actually believe what I'm about to say, but more as an intellectual exercise, I'm going to posit the question: is Little Shop of Horrors a secretly brilliant allegory about appropriation?
All right, listen, I will entertain this idea. Back it up in a way beyond that.
All right. No. Because what I was about to say was that I'm talking more so about the stage show here, with like the original ending and the original interpretation of the character sort of intact, because there definitely was some watering down, and especially with that quote from Frank Oz, I think we can definitively say there is nothing brilliant about the way the Little Shop of Horrors movie treats race. But talking about like let's call the original vision of this dark satire, because that's the weird thing.
Are we talking the 1960s version, or are we talking about the play version?
Oh, we're talking about the play version, since this this stuff the 60s version is kind of a different beast.
Yeah, I mean, for context, just before you get into that, I do just want to bring into some more consideration as to what changed that like really kind of drives this home. And that like originally in the 1960s version, Audrey wasn't some sort of alien plant. It was just a thing that the nerdy dude went, oh, I'm gonna make these two plants fuck, and then Audrey 2 came out. So like, it wasn't some weird invasion thing. And also Audrey 2 in that movie had no real desire to like take over the world or anything like that. Audrey 2 was just hungry and wanted to eat. So
yes. No, that is an important distinction. With this idea of like the invaders, let's consider our protagonists for a minute with the full scope of the original ending, where they're not played to be out like some sort of like action movie like couple, right? They are like caricatures of like dumb white people, basically. And from that point of view, honestly, most of the characters in this movie are some sort of caricature like that. Caricature old businessman, caricature old greaser, but also dentist, which is the wildest one. What ends up happening is the real maliciousness, the way that Rick Moranis' character, the way that Rick Moranis takes this plant that he thinks that he owns, that he thinks that he can profit off of, the way that musicians profited off of rock and roll, and the way that eventually got twisted and bastardized into the capitalist nightmare that is the music industry. And that same way is the sin of Audrey, not black culture, but the dumb fuck, bumbling white person's theft and interpretation of that black culture. Excuse me.
I am thinking about this for a second. You're gonna have to give me a minute.
Because I feel to clarify again, I am playing devil's advocate here, mostly because I think it's an interesting thought to entertain. Again, I'm not willing to give Frank Oz any credit on this one, which is why I'm emphasizing the original stage show, where I would pull it apart. In that sense, where I would pull it apart is that Audrey 2, there's no getting around that Audrey 2 is coded as like, an inherently malicious invader.
So are we talking like original one before the influence of the Frank Oz movie took hold?
Yeah. But again, like
I think my problem at that point then is I don't have a frame of reference to say one way or another, because I think if you are applying the logic of the movie to a potentially different stage show, like an amalgamation of what you are assuming the original stage show to look like with the understanding of both the movie and a stage show that you have in fact seen, I think like I could not say one way or another. I don't know that we necessarily have the information to. I think that it would need a little bit more information. We need more information is really what it boils down to. Mostly I would like to know like what the perspective of the two leads are, because as you said, they are a little bit more bumbling in the stage show, which does help to undercut that. I think that the biggest condemnation of the movie, or one of, is the fact that the two leads are not presented as foibly caricatures, but rather as like straight-laced heroes that we want to see victorious,
which I think is the biggest difference, like in the stage show, even the version that I saw, and that like it is like there's very little pretense that like the appeal of Rick Moranis' character is that we're gonna watch him develop into some fucking hero. No, he's a spineless loser who gets everyone killed because he's like doing the Reddit nice guy thing. Like that's pretty clear cut in the stage show. Now again, do I actually like truly believe what I just said? Not really. Again, mostly because I only have the information that I have to go on, and that like like without the context of the original Broadway show, it's impossible to say. But like I find it weird, and like this is the one thing that I've been sort of like pondering on, like even when it comes to the domestic abuse stuff, violence on the stage, like in a live like setting, is sort of it's hard to do with any sort of like weight and impact for like seriousness. Like I've seen a couple of serious like dramas that include domestic violence, and like because of the theatricality of the stage, it makes it hard to have the impact that something really like tight and intimate and realistic as like a film does. So like one thing that I struggle with is that like thinking about this show is that like if we're thinking about it as a satire, I think in some ways it is, again, not the Frank Oz version. The Frank Oz version made a lot of bad fucking decisions. But like just thinking about the show at its core, like it does make a lot of interesting decisions that, again, like probably vary because it's a stage show from like production to production. So it's hard to make a statement on like what the original intent or like how it plays out, because each production is so different. Whereas the movie, like a lot of that interesting stuff is either changed to not be there, or like the way it was filmed, like with the domestic violence stuff, which I think you can make a greater case for like having that be sort of so broad on the stage that like so like such a caricature and such a like campy environment that it almost does become like a form of like absurdist slapstick. I don't know if I agree with that, but I'm at least willing to entertain that idea, whereas here it's so much more like the Dr. Payne, he does stuff in his dental practice, and it's all weird and over the top, and then like when he goes and abuses his girlfriend, it's like weirdly uncomfortable in how like serious it's all taken. Like Steve Martin is like screaming at her, and there's like some actual impact when he actually like strikes her, and so all that stuff. I mean, it's something. Like I said, I sincerely believe that like Little Shop of Horrors is secretly brilliant. No, especially not in the film version. But like something about it, man. Like there's a reason that like I even entertained this thought. Like, is it truly as rotten to the core as it seems to be?
Well, I mean, I think part of that, and this is genuine, is that I don't have an answer for you. I don't know much about the stage show.
Oh, of course. That was a rhetorical question. Maybe someone does have an answer to it, but we certainly don't.
But B, I do think that a lot of the racism presented in Little Shop of Horrors, the 1986 movie, even with looking at the Frank Oz quote, is more incidental than intentional. I think he was playing with a lot of tropes and ideas that were around at the time, kind of playing with a monster movie. I don't know if he entirely knew all that he was doing. So I don't even necessarily fully want to say like, oh, this is a horribly racist movie like Birth of a Nation where it was just outwardly racist. But it definitely has those racist moments. So like that does lend some credence to your own thoughts of maybe the stage show is doing some interesting stuff with that we're just not seeing here, which is entirely possible.
Yeah, because with the stage show, like the stage show feels subversive to me. And like whether or not it actually is, again, it's hard to say because I've only ever seen like a cutesy community theater version of it, right? But like something about this idea that we're going to take this corny ass old 60s movie, we're going to remake it with all this camp like musical stuff, like a giant man-eating puppet, and like have the characters be so broad and so like obviously satirical. Like it leaves me with the feeling like maybe there is something there, or at least like I could theoretically see you putting on a production of this.
This I was thinking about a lot. I think that if you gave this movie to like some black filmmakers or something like that, they would produce something fucking incredible.
Yeah, like it's interesting. Like there've been talks about a remake of this, and I think that if that ever comes to pass, like we should do an episode and see if it just ends up being like nostalgia bait, like repeats all the same problems that this old one has, or if they take what seems like pretty fertile, like subversive ground and like do something with it, Part
of the reason that I was so unsure about whether or not what I was seeing was like actually a thing is because it almost does feel like the whole movie itself could be satire, and like kind of playing with the tropes in like a Blazing Saddles type of a way.
I was thinking about that too. Yeah, I don't think there's enough evidence.
No, I was gonna say like what this feels like is this movie took this tightrope, started to walk it, and then forgot to make the characters bumbling, and instead just made them straight up heroes. And so you root for them, which means that you root against the other people, and so it just is racist as opposed to subversive.
Yeah.
So it's a very interesting movie in that like it comes very close to saying something interesting about it, but then falls off that tightrope, hits itself in the head, and gets a concussion and does bad things. Oh man, do we have anything else we want to say on this? I feel like we've said quite a lot and probably pissed off more than a few people.
We've said quite a lot. I could tell. I could even tell that I was like, I'm gonna play devil's advocate here. You were like, Jackson, what the fuck are you about to do? I'm like, no.
Listen, man, as soon as the words devil's advocate comes out of anyone's mouth, my first question is, why? What for? To what end? Why?
And the end here was, I don't know, mental masturbation, I guess.
I mean, I think it was interesting, and it is, as we said, a movie that feels like it almost does do something satirical. So, like, if it was based on a stage show that did have some satire in that regard, the shift could be entirely on the movie, and so the stage show could have a little bit more subtle subversion to it that this movie doesn't. I think that I don't even know that's necessarily playing a devil's advocate in that moment as much as it is just being like, well, hey, what if this is an interesting idea that would go on? And being a devil's advocate in this case would be like, no, actually, it was perfect and a clear representation of America. Whereas then I'd be like, Jackson, I was kidding about us quitting the podcast when you made the Metal Gear reference. I think we actually need to have a talk now.
Well, because the reason I said devil's advocate is, again, it's like I'm not sure how much of my own like little theory that I was formulating, because I agree with everything you said about like what's present in the movie, but just that one little hitch, I'm like, what happens if we pull on this a little bit? And, that got me thinking. So,
Yeah.
I'm not even sure, like, to what degree I think it's true. But I thought it was an interesting thought.
I mean, like, it's important to pull on those hitches, to unravel your arguments, to make sure that they stand up and don't fully leave you naked, It's important to do that. So I do appreciate that. I do just want to say that this was an incredibly sensitive subject in a lot of ways. I am a white dude. I do not have these experiences. If I have misspoken at any time, or if I have insinuated something, or if I said something that was just inherently racist without realizing it, first of all, I fully apologize. I did not intend to. I tried to do this as best as I could. Second of all, please yell at me. Please yell at me. I entirely deserve it. I'm going to listen to this again on the edit, and hopefully if I need to correct something, there might be some weird voice switching there. If there was, that's what happened there. I went, oh God, I shouldn't have said that, and corrected myself. But if it somehow still gets by, it's something that I don't know, or I didn't know, or I didn't think about when I was doing the edit. Yell at me for that. I need it. I deserve it. And it's important to do. I don't want to say something racist, because fuck racists.
We're here to improve. That comes from the both of us. And definitely, like pointed out, we're here to listen. We're here to learn. We love learning. So
I read fucking academic articles for this. I love learning. That's what I read an academic article to talk about this goddamn movie. All right. Well, listen, I've been Sean McKinda. If you do want to yell at me, it's at Sean_McKinda on Twitter. Please feel free. I entirely deserve it. I have nothing really going on right now, so follow me and yell at me if you want.
And I am in fact not a racist piranha plant, but I'm your man Jackson Keller. That's me. It's in the flesh. The juicy, delicious piranha plant flesh. You can follow me on Twitter at Jackson J. Keller, but I've kind of given up on it. I haven't nuked it. I don't think I'm going to nuke it because it might prove useful in the future, but I'm not looking at it anymore. Fuck Twitter.
Honestly, the best decision you can make, and I cannot make that decision. Oh God, I need help. If you want to follow the podcast, that's at BADH_cast on Twitter. That's just a great place to let you know, like, if we got updates or something coming out. I'm trying to tweet like what the next episode is going to be, because people might not listen to an episode if they're like, I don't know what this is. I don't want to spoil myself for it. I'm just going to skip it and listen to the next one. So I'm trying to tweet that out more so people have a little bit more time to prime. So if you want to watch Kiki's Delivery Service with us, that's the way you will know to do so. If you want to yell at us more directly, have an actual conversation with us, the best place to do that is on our Discord. And you get access to our Discord. Go to patreon.com/BADHcast. $1 a month gets access to our Discord. $5 a month gets you access to a slew of bonus episodes. And $10 a month gets you access to a slew of bonus episodes, our Discord, and the ability to request bonus episodes like Pat did with Velocipaster, although I think he meant it as a joke, but we did it anyway and released a really good episode, so you should go listen to that. It also gets a little something.
Thank you so much. Speaking of Pat, thank you, Pat, Julia, Travis, Mom, Aunt Summer, our glorious stallion patrons. Thank you so much for keeping the lights on here.
And thank you so much, Lords of Highway, for the use of our theme song. It is Suicide, alternate take off the album High Octane, Low Expectations. They're a wonderful band. You should go check them out wherever you can. Go buy their CDs, stream their music, whatever you got to do. Support artists in general right now. Fucking support theater people. They need it a lot. You can't go to the theater right now. Fucking support theater people. There's lots of ways to do so. Look it up. Do so. I'll throw a link in the description of the episode as well. I don't have anything on the top of my head. Also, thanks to 25yearslatersite.com. There's a little button of us in the corner. You can click on it. It'll take you right to our website. But you should also see what else people are writing over there. There's a bunch of really talented people doing a lot of really talented writing that you should absolutely read. Next week, as I said, we're going to be talking about Kiki's Delivery Service. Another just beating a dead horse whiplash. And stay tuned. I'm pretty excited to watch this one.
I'm always excited for anime, guys.
Bye.
Don't you go into the ground. Don't you go